Welcome to the discussion of physical and cognitive development in middle childhood, the period from ages 6 to 12. Erikson called this the stage of industry versus inferiority, and it's a period of remarkable growth. Middle childhood is sometimes called the forgotten developmental period because it lacks the drama of infancy or adolescence. But don't be fooled. The brain is actively pruning and myelinating. Children develop logical thought, and cultural identity becomes increasingly salient. Across cultures, this period has been recognized as the beginning of the Age of Reason. In many diverse communities, children at this age take on meaningful roles, tending gardens, caring for siblings, participating in ceremonies. The relational worldview recognizes that cognitive, physical, emotional, and spiritual growth are interconnected. Today, we'll explore physical growth, brain development, motor skills, nutrition, cognitive milestones, intelligence, and exceptionalities. Always asking, how do culture, neurodiversity, and systemic factors shape these pathways? We're entering Part 1, Physical Development. This section covers the tangible, observable changes happening in children's bodies and brains during middle childhood. Think of this period as consolidation and refinement, rather than the explosive growth of infancy or the hormonal changes of adolescence. Children are growing steadily. Their brains are becoming more efficient through myelination and pruning, and their motor skills are becoming smoother and more coordinated. From a counseling perspective, what makes this period interesting is how physical development intersects with self-concept, peer relationships, and cultural identity. A child whose motor skills develop more slowly may experience social exclusion. A child from a food-insecure community may face nutritional challenges affecting cognitive performance. A neurodivergent child may experience motor coordination differences misinterpreted as behavioral problems. As we move through these slides, keep asking, how would I, as a counselor, recognize when physical development concerns are affecting a child's emotional well-being and social functioning? Physical growth during middle childhood is slow and steady, about 2 to 3 inches and 5 to 7 pounds per year. I like the metaphor of tree rings, growth shaped by environment, nutrition, and context. Critically, growth charts used in pediatric offices are largely based on Western middle-class populations. Comparing children from different backgrounds to these standards can pathologize normal variation. The relational worldview, developed by Terry Cross, frames wellness as an interconnected web of body, mind, spirit, and context. Using this framework to assess physical development, we need to ask, what's this child's cultural context? How do systemic factors like food deserts or poverty affect their growth? Research on North American Indian communities found that factors including nutritional transitions from locally sourced to store-bought foods and psychosocial stress contribute to physical development differences, all connected to historical displacement and poverty. 3 key brain processes define middle childhood: myelination, pruning, and automatization. Myelination is like upgrading from dial-up to fiber optic. Glial cells wrap around axons, dramatically speeding neural communication. Between ages 6 and 8, fine motor skills and eye-hand coordination improve significantly. Between 10 and 12, frontal lobe development brings advances in logic, planning, and memory. Pruning is the brain cutting away unused connections, strengthening those that remain. A use-it-or-lose-it process. Experiences literally shape brain architecture, which is why enriched environments matter and adverse experiences can be so damaging. Automatization makes repeated behaviors automatic, like reading, progressing from sounding out letters to fluent comprehension. For neurodivergent children, brain development follows different, not deficient, trajectories. Shaw and colleagues found that ADHD involves delayed prefrontal cortex maturation. Delayed, not absent. The neurodiversity paradigm, supported by Swanepoel's 2024 research, frames ADHD and autism as natural biological variations rather than disorders. Meet Kai, an 8-year-old Native American boy, referred because his teacher says he can't sit still and doesn't pay attention. But his grandmother describes him as energetic, curious, and a gifted storyteller who remembers detailed oral histories. He excels in hands-on activities, but struggles with worksheets. This case illustrates several important concepts. Developmentally, at age 8, Kai's prefrontal cortex is still maturing. Sustained attention to unengaging tasks is genuinely harder. This isn't a character flaw, it's a developmental reality. Culturally, in many indigenous communities, learning happens through observation, storytelling, and hands-on participation. Kai's strengths may reflect learning styles valued in his home culture. From a neurodiversity perspective, even if Kai has ADHD, his energy and curiosity can be viewed as strengths. Before jumping to evaluation, a counselor might advocate for culturally responsive assessment, gathering information from his grandmother about behavior in community settings, and exploring universal design for learning strategies at school before labeling behavior as disordered. Motor development in middle childhood has both gross and fine motor dimensions, and both carry social significance. Gross motor skills become smoother as the cerebral cortex and cerebellum mature. Fine motor development supports writing, crafts, and music. Different cultures develop different motor competencies. A child who does beadwork develops different fine motor skills than one who plays piano. Neither is better, they're different pathways. Developmental coordination disorder affects 5 to 6% of school-aged children and frequently co-occurs with ADHD and dyslexia, particularly underdiagnosed in girls. The counseling implication: children with slower motor development tend to be less accepted by peers, connecting directly to Erikson's industry versus inferiority crisis. When a child presents with low self-esteem or social withdrawal, ask, could motor skill differences be contributing? And are we measuring motor competence in a way that reflects this child's cultural context? The recommendation is 60 minutes of daily physical activity, but how children get that activity varies enormously by culture and community. Rough and tumble play is a pro-social activity where children practice assertiveness, relationship skills, and energy regulation. It bridges to organized games with rules. Access to organized sports varies by socioeconomic status. For neurodivergent children, team sports may be overwhelming. Children with ADHD may thrive in individual sports like swimming or martial arts. Children on the autism spectrum may prefer structured or solo activities. As counselors, we help families find physical activities matching their child's interests and sensory profile, not force every child into the same mold. Nutrition in middle childhood requires careful use of our cultural lens. Nearly 20% of U.S. children are classified as obese, with rates highest among Hispanic, Black, and American Indian Alaska Native children. For indigenous communities, this connects to colonial history. Displacement disrupted traditional food systems, replacing locally sourced foods with processed government commodities. 1 in 4 Native Americans experiences food insecurity compared to 1 in 9 Americans overall. But indigenous communities are leading food sovereignty movements, revitalizing traditional food systems and reclaiming dietary practices. As counselors, we should avoid pathologizing body size. BMI was developed primarily using European populations and doesn't account for body composition variations across groups, rather than focusing on individual choices, which ignores systemic barriers. We should advocate for community-level solutions, access to healthy food, safe spaces for activity, and culturally relevant nutrition education. Middle childhood has the lowest mortality rate of any age group, but health disparities demand our attention. The leading cause of death is preventable accidents. About 14% of children take prescription medication for chronic conditions. American Indian and Alaska Native children face higher injury rates linked to rural isolation and underfunding of the Indian Health Service. Black and Hispanic children have higher asthma rates connected to housing quality and environmental exposures. Adverse childhood experiences are disproportionately experienced by marginalized communities, affecting both physical and cognitive development through chronic stress and elevated cortisol. When working with a child who has chronic health problems, think about the bigger picture: social determinants of health, systemic barriers, and opportunities for advocacy beyond the individual level. We're now transitioning to Part 2, Cognitive Development. If physical development in middle childhood is about consolidation and refinement, cognitive development is about transformation. During these years, children make a fundamental shift from pre-operational thinking, which is intuitive, egocentric, and focused on appearances, to concrete operational thinking, which is logical, systematic, and grounded in evidence. This isn't just an academic milestone. It transforms how children understand fairness, rules, relationships, and their own identity. We'll cover Piaget's concrete operations stage, information processing theory, language development, intelligence and its measurement, and exceptionalities including learning disabilities and ADHD. Throughout, we'll continue asking, how do culture and neurodiversity shape these cognitive pathways? And what does this mean for counseling practice? Piaget's concrete operations stage, roughly ages 7 to 11, brings the ability to think logically about concrete problems. The key concepts are reversibility, classification, seriation, transitivity, conservation, and decentration. Reversibility means mentally undoing an action. Knowing that 3 plus 4 equals 7 means 7 minus 4 equals 3. Conservation is understanding that quantities don't change despite changes in appearance. Decentration allows focusing on multiple aspects of a problem simultaneously. The cross-cultural research is important. Dason's 2022 review across Bali, Indonesia, India, and Nepal found the sequence of stages is consistent across cultures, but the ages at which children reach substages vary considerably. Culture influences which skills develop first. Spatial reasoning may emerge earlier in cultures where children navigate complex environments. For indigenous communities, emphasis on oral tradition and relational thinking develops cognitive skills that standard Piagetian assessments don't capture. A child tracking complex kinship relationships demonstrates sophisticated classification, just not in the way a standardized test would measure it. Information processing theory gives us a more detailed, mechanistic view of how cognition works. Think of the brain as a computer processing data through stages. Working memory capacity expands significantly during middle childhood. This is important because working memory is where active thinking happens. As it grows, children can hold more information in mind simultaneously, enabling more complex problem-solving and reading comprehension. Long-term memory also grows dramatically as children accumulate knowledge and develop better organizational strategies. Key strategies emerging during this period include rehearsal, repeating information to maintain it, organization, elaboration, and most importantly, metacognition. Thinking about one's own thinking. Metacognition is the foundation of self-regulated learning. Advances in processing speed mean that basic operations require less effort, freeing resources for higher-order thinking. It's like upgrading a slow processor. The same tasks take less power, leaving more capacity for complex operations. Critically, a 2024 meta-analysis of 180 studies by Sadozai and colleagues found that executive function deficits are transdiagnostic across neurodevelopmental conditions, appearing in ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities with a moderate effect size. This means executive function support strategies like visual schedules and breaking tasks into smaller steps benefit children across the neurodevelopmental spectrum, regardless of specific diagnosis. Selective attention, sustained attention, and executive functions undergo significant development as the prefrontal cortex matures. These include planning, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. Here's where cultural context matters powerfully. Barbara Rogoff described keen attention, a mode of learning common in many Indigenous and Latin American communities, in which children learn by observing multiple events simultaneously. This broad attentional style may look like not paying attention in classrooms that value focused, teacher-directed attention. Similarly, in many Indigenous communities, children are taught to listen deeply and respond thoughtfully rather than quickly. In American classrooms, quick responses are often equated with intelligence, creating a cultural mismatch. ADHD hyperfocus, intense concentration on interesting tasks, is often framed as a deficit when the real issue may be task-motivation mismatch. Research by Sedgwick and colleagues identified creativity, resilience, and cognitive dynamism as ADHD-associated strengths. Instead of asking, "Why can't this child pay attention?" we should ask, "What conditions help this child learn best?" Language development in middle childhood is remarkable. Vocabulary expands by thousands of words, complex grammar is mastered, and pragmatic skills develop as children learn to adjust communication for different audiences. Cultural differences in communication styles are critically important. Eye contact norms vary. In many African American and Latin American communities, avoiding direct eye contact with adults is respectful, but teachers may interpret this as evasion. Wait time varies. Indigenous communities often value longer, more deliberate responses, while classrooms reward speed. Bilingual children often show enhanced executive function and cognitive flexibility. Bilingualism is a cognitive advantage, not a barrier. Indigenous language revitalization programs, like the Caras Children's Learning Center at Cochiti Pueblo, demonstrate how heritage language preservation supports both cognitive and cultural development simultaneously. Language carries culture, worldview, and identity. For counselors, never assume different communication patterns indicate language delays. Always assess within the child's cultural and linguistic context. Intelligence is one of the most politically charged topics in developmental psychology. IQ tests have been criticized since the 1970s for bias favoring Anglo-American, middle-class respondents. What counts as smart varies culturally. Western cultures equate intelligence with speed, while many cultures value thoughtful deliberation. Indigenous ways of knowing frame intelligence as relational understanding, ecological awareness, spiritual wisdom, and community responsibility, fundamentally different from Western individualistic constructs. Gardner's multiple intelligences and Sternberg's triarchic theory both push beyond traditional IQ. Sternberg's practical intelligence, solving real-world problems in context, is highly valued in non-Western cultures, but rarely measured by IQ tests. Carol Dweck's research on growth versus fixed mindset remains relevant. Process praise supports resilience, while person praise can undermine it. For counselors, when a child from a marginalized community scores low on a standardized test, ask whether the test measures their intelligence or their familiarity with the cultural assumptions embedded in it. Exceptionalities become noticeable in middle childhood as academic and social demands increase. Intellectual disability involves an IQ below 70 combined with limitations in adaptive behavior, but assessment tools may underestimate the abilities of children from non-dominant cultures. Always take a strengths-based approach. Twice exceptional children, both gifted and disabled, are often overlooked because one masks the other. Children of color and low-income children are significantly underrepresented in gifted programs. Universal screening reduces this bias. The 2024 Michelini paper in World Psychiatry proposed a transdiagnostic framework, viewing neurodevelopmental conditions as points on a spectrum rather than distinct categories. This supports a dimensional, strength-based approach. Our role as counselors is to help families understand neurodevelopmental differences as part of human diversity, advocate for appropriate supports, and combat stigma. Learning disabilities affect children with normal or above-average intelligence who experience specific difficulties in areas such as reading, math, or written expression. About 5% of school-aged children receive LD services, the largest special education category. Key types include dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. An important equity issue. Children from diverse backgrounds can be both over-identified and under-identified for learning disabilities, depending on context. Sometimes cultural differences are misidentified as LDs. Other times, actual LDs are missed. ADHD affects 11.4% of U.S. children, about 7.1 million, with boys diagnosed nearly twice as often as girls. That gender gap reflects diagnostic bias. Girls more often present with inattentive symptoms rather than hyperactivity, making them less disruptive and less likely to be referred. The strength-based reframe is essential. ADHD is associated with creativity, cognitive dynamism, resilience, and hyper-focus on interesting tasks. Autistic strengths include attention to detail, strong memory, pattern recognition, and deep loyalty. Our role isn't to minimize challenges. They're real. But we help children develop identity narratives that include their neurodivergence as part of who they are, not as a deficit to be fixed. We support families in understanding their child's profile, advocate for accommodations and universal design, and address the co-occurring anxiety and depression that affect most neurodivergent children. Meet Maya, a 10-year-old biracial girl who reads 2 grade levels ahead but is failing math with illegible handwriting. She's anxious, has morning stomach aches, and spends hours on art projects, but melts down over math homework. Her teacher says she just needs to try harder. She hasn't been evaluated. Maya could be twice exceptional, gifted plus dyscalculia or dysgraphia. She might also have inattentive ADHD. As a biracial black girl, research shows she's less likely to be referred for either gifted or LD evaluation. Her difficulties get attributed to effort rather than investigated as disabilities. Her stomach aches are classic somatic anxiety. Concrete operational children can anticipate failure and compare themselves to peers, but may lack the vocabulary to articulate distress. A strength-based conceptualization highlights her advanced reading, artistic talent, and intelligence alongside genuine challenges that deserve evaluation. The teacher's try harder response is an advocacy moment. This pattern of high ability paired with specific difficulty is a hallmark of learning disabilities and warrants comprehensive assessment. Let me leave you with 5 key takeaways from today's discussion. First, middle childhood is a period of consolidation, not stagnation. The brain is actively pruning, myelinating, and building efficient neural networks. This is foundational work that shapes everything that comes next. Second, physical and cognitive development are deeply shaped by culture, socioeconomic status, and systemic factors. Growth charts, IQ tests, and behavioral assessments all carry cultural assumptions. Never assess a child's development in isolation from their context. Third, neurodivergence represents natural variation, not deficit. The neurodiversity paradigm encourages a strength-based, dimensional approach, honoring the whole person rather than focusing on what's wrong. Fourth, assessment tools carry cultural bias. Advocate for culturally responsive evaluation and universal design for learning. When classrooms are designed for only one type of learner, many children are set up to fail. Fifth, the whole child. Physical health, cognitive development, emotional well-being, cultural identity, and relational context are interconnected. The relational worldview offers a model for holistic developmental understanding that aligns beautifully with best practices in counseling. Keep coming back to these principles as you prepare for your collaborative learning activities and your quiz. They're the foundation of culturally responsive, developmentally informed counseling practice. Here are the references cited throughout this presentation. These include foundational texts from your course readings, Erford and Ray, as well as current research from 2024 and 2025 on neurodiversity, cultural factors in development, childhood obesity disparities, executive function, and cross-cultural Piagetian research. I especially recommend exploring the Michelini et al. 2024 paper on transdiagnostic frameworks for neurodevelopmental conditions and the Sadozai et al. 2024 meta-analysis on executive function. These represent cutting-edge thinking that will enrich your understanding of the topics we covered today. Thank you for your engagement with this material. As you move into your collaborative learning groups, bring your questions, your cultural perspectives, and your curiosity. See you next time.